Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Becca McNeil. I'm a correspondent at the 74 Million, an education news website. And I want to thank you for coming to this special event that we're hosting in cooperation with Big Heart World, where we're going to be talking to some really intelligent and diverse panelists about their different approaches to social and emotional learning, where it comes into their lives and their work, and what parents can learn to better support their kids. And so a lot of us have heard about social and emotional learning. We might have heard about it in the news, or we might have heard about it from our kids' teachers. It's something that really, whether we know it or we don't know it, most of us are participating in one way or another. So we're going to learn more about it from people who've given it a lot of thought. And to start us off, I had the privilege of sitting down to talk with Daryl DMC McDaniels about his passion for helping kids find their voices and the confidence that comes with that. After decades on the stage and in the spotlight, Daryl has taken some of the hard life lessons he's learned and turned them into inspiration for adults and children alike with big feelings, big dreams, and sometimes big struggles. Our conversation has nuggets of hard earned wisdom for parents and teachers and anyone who wants to help kids grow in their emotional intelligence. I'm excited to share that with you now. What do you see from your life that when you look at kids now, you're thinking, oh, I really want you guys to have this skill because you're going to need it?
If you think about social, emotional skills and reacting and stuff like that to various conditions in society and in a social area, a lot of the things that we go through as adults start when we're younger. When you look at a child, our world is our business world, Becca, our friendships, our families, and all the interactions we have with people, throughout our careers and personal love life and all of that stuff. The kids' environment is the same thing, but their world is their households, their backyards, their neighborhoods, their schoolyards, and their classrooms. And all the anxiety, stress, self-esteem, confidence, even being afraid and confusion starts there. But a lot of times we have a bad habit of going to the children. You're too young to be thinking about that. So
Yes.
the whole important thing that we have been missing when it comes to empowering our young people with social emotional skills is let them be engaged from the point where they're at.
Gosh, that's so huge. I think
Mm-hmm.
especially for parents who are thinking like, I just want my kid to be happy.
To be over,
That's all I
yes.
want.
And they're always happy, but when this thing happens, we don't let them express, we don't let them go through with the emotions. Yeah, maybe they're young individuals, but they're young people too.
Oh, I love that. And for our listeners, the book that Daryl is referring to is his book Daryl's Dream, which is about I think he's in
Third
third
grade,
grade,
yep.
and he wants to do one of his poems in the talent
That's
show.
all he wants to do.
And yeah, but the big kids, the older kids or the cooler
Yeah.
kids or whatever are bullying him a little bit and telling him that.
I was a kid that was in the comic books.
Ooh.
And even though these superheroes were super powered and wonderful at saving the world, when Spider-Man Peter Parker wasn't in his Spider-Man suit, he had as much pandemonium in his life as I did. And
Yes,
I was
yes.
able to relate to those things. So there
Mm-hmm.
were models for me to follow. And a lot of the other models was through the things that from the stories that I read in school, like Pippi Longstocking,
Oh, I
and
love Pippi.
yeah, and Sounder, and I was watching a Marvel TV show, and one of the superheroes in the Marvel TV show said, "Pippi Longstocking is the greatest superhero." But
It's
then,
true.
yeah, but then when you look at all of these pop culture figures and stuff like that, we overlook the fact that even though they're Luke Skywalker's wonderful, he had a lot of problems. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? He had parental issues. So I just said,
Yes.
okay, if I'm coming from if I'm going to communicate with these children, I can't communicate with them from the point that I communicated with their mothers and fathers, and I've been around so long with their grandmothers and grandmothers. So if I bring myself to their, let me put Daryl,
Yeah.
kids look at us and think it was easy for us, but it wasn't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So their social emotional skills, their training, it's important that their training of how to handle these certain situations, that we address them at the point where they at, whether it's kindergarten, first grade, or second grade.
I love that. And I love this that you're pointing out about even Marvel
Mm-hmm.
and the stories that we love. And I point this out
Yes.
to my kids all the time that
Mm-hmm.
now pay close attention. Did everybody like, Percy Jackson or Harry Potter or
Right.
Spider-Man? Like they
Yes.
all had bullies and to help
Yes.
and
Yes.
yeah, that you don't have to be the strong man. And that
Right,
there's
right,
like
exactly. And
what
a lot of
makes
times what drives the kids to hang with the bad crowd or join the gangs or do the
hmm
negative stuff is, I've been saying this for the last 15 years. Negativity is used as a false sense of power. And
yes.
even when it comes to mental health, the perception is it's a weakness to confess that something's wrong with you, especially for men. You're
Right.
not supposed to go to therapy, and that's a weakness. Not realizing it's the most powerful thing that you could always do. When I speak to these kids, I say it's okay not to know the answer. It's
hmm
okay to put your hand up and say in front of the whole class, "Teacher, I need help. I don't understand what's going on." But a lot of children won't speak up about their issues because they're ashamed of it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we got to teach our children, like you just said, not to be ashamed of your emotions. I tell kids, I've been doing music. I've been in the music business for 40 years, children, and I still get scared before I go on stage. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be confused. It's okay not to know what to do.
You come from a world where projecting strength, projecting um,
Oh, yes.
swagger is really a commodity. I mean, that's a
Yes.
commodity. But I'd love
It's
to hear you
sold.
talk
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
talk about how that veneer kind of fell away for you, and you really discovered the power in
Yeah.
therapy, mental health,
Mm-hmm.
relationships, and all of that.
For my first 35 years in music, it's a powerful thing to educate, entertain, and empower people by telling people about how great things is. I notice when I say I'm the king of rock, there is none higher. Sucker MCs should call me sire. To burn my kingdom, you must use fire, but I won't stop rocking till I retire. That's like very, very dynamic and like, wow, oh my God, this guy has so much confidence in this and that. But when I look back at that rhyme really touched a lot of people because it was talking, they was listening to me say it in a dynamic way, but they didn't realize that those words are things that they can use from themselves. When I say to burn my kingdom, you must use fire. You could take away my castle. You could take away my money. You could take away all this fortune and fame. But inside of me is everything necessary for me to be happy and make it through life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And nobody determines my success or how long or where I could go. I won't stop rocking till I retire. The manager
hmm
doesn't decide that. The label, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it was those type of things. So I noticed that when at Christmas time in Hollis, Queen, everybody loved me when I was talking about how great things is for Daryl.
Yeah.
But I found out this, Becca. I found out I was a trillion times more powerful when I spoke to people with the same enthusiasm that I would when things was going right. With
Right.
that same enthusiasm, yo, I'm not doing that well today. Yo, I'm depressed today. So
Right.
stigma exists because we don't have dialogue about the feelings. So
Right.
how will kids be able to navigate the social, emotional universe if we don't let them start when they first feel one in the first place?
Gosh, that's so important. I think a lot of I was listening to a teacher talk the other day, and he said it's not
Wow.
it's not just about letting the kid have the emotion, like go in the other room and have your emotion. It's about embracing it and welcoming it
Yes. Yep.
and talking about
And
it.
talking about it. And then and it's in there that they'll find the solutions. At two of the schools I was speaking at one time, the teachers got really excited, and I didn't know what I was doing. When we was talking about the bullies, I explained to the kids, when you see somebody getting bullied, or if you're getting bullied, it's okay to go tell somebody what's going on. That's not snitching. People have
Right.
told y'all it's a bad thing to snitch. I say, is it a bad thing to tell the truth? And the kids go, no. And I say, more importantly, the bully, when you go tell somebody about what's going on, if it's you getting bullied, or if you see somebody getting bullied, what you are doing is getting the bully help. The bully is
Yes.
going through, and the kids was like, really, the bully? You're perfect just the way you are. There's somebody either bullying the bully that we don't know about, or there's something going on in the bully's home or at school that they're afraid to talk about. So when you go tell an adult or a teacher you're getting bullied, or you've seen someone get a bully, you're not doing a bad thing. And I heard one of the teachers in the background go, "Oh, that's a great way to teach kids social emotional learning." You know what I'm saying? Because now it gives them a purpose to handle the situations, and they will look at it differently now.
Right. If we work all the way through this, the
Yes.
feeling of coming back together is good.
And then
And that's
and
kind
and then they'll have empathy
yes.
for other kids.
Yes. They can only do that if they know that the adult isn't just going to punish the bully. Because that's
Exactly.
just going to make it
Right.
worse for them.
Yes, exactly. It's helping the bully.
And they have to know that the adults there have that mindset to help
Yes,
the
yeah.
bully.
It's not a dictatorship.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that they're
some of the kids get discouraged from speaking up because a lot of times when they do, nothing gets done.
right.
And as they get older, and it starts when these kids are little. I mean, these kindergarten kids are amazing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
reading a book to them, and at the end of when it was the discussion time, one of the kids put their hand up and said, "Mr. DMC," because I'm old now. It was
Mr.
like, yeah,
DMC.
Mr.
I love it.
DMC. Why didn't little Daryl in the book call his poem rap? And I was like, wow, this little kindergarten kid is very observant. Because I said, when I was little, hip hop didn't exist. It was just poetry till we put it to the music.
Yeah.
But that shows these kids want process.
Yes, they're putting everything in places and they're looking for cause and effect and all of
Yeah,
that.
exactly, exactly. So they need to see that being scared and afraid and confused might feel like a bad thing, but it doesn't lead to anything worse.
Right.
And that's the
Exactly.
fear.
Well,
That's the
yeah.
fear that we have.
And I think though it's that just points out that it's incumbent on us as adults to if we're going to say you're safe to have your emotions, we need to make it safe.
Exactly, exactly. The other word I wanted to say is we are also, in addition to being guides, we got to be examples.
Yes. Yes.
So when I talked to the kids, I said I got teased and bullied for wearing my glasses.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Four Eyes. Hey, binoculars. Blind as a bat. I mean, every glasses wearing joke there is. I got that when I was little. But then I tell the kids, but one of the first things that I did when I made one of my first records, I stood up in front of the whole world. And I said, D's for doing it all of the time. M is for the rhymes that are all mine. I said C is for cool, cool as can be. And my partner Run would ask me, why do you wear those glasses? And I would shout, so I can see. I
That's
said I stood up
awesome.
in front of the world and talked about with no shame the very thing people thought something was wrong with me about. And I tell
Mm-hmm.
the kids that was so powerful. Ask your mothers and fathers and your grandmothers and grandfathers.
Especially the
People
ones that
that do,
wore glasses.
yes, yep, the ones that were they felt empowered, but also the very people that didn't wear glasses that were teasing me, people who didn't even need glasses now wanted to wear them. They got to realize, okay, here's the situation. My freckles ain't going to change, My blonde
Mhm.
hair ain't gonna change. My funny shoes ain't gonna change. The funny food that I like ain't gonna change. So I might as well use it because it's part of me. Once we get them through not feeling guilty or ashamed about who they are, they
Yep.
won't feel guilty and ashamed and be reluctant to deal with the situation. They'll be more open to come home and tell you, Mom, Dad, I'm getting bullied. Instead
Yeah.
of you finding out 8 months later after, first
Yeah.
started. They will understand what to do as soon as that situation comes to them.
Yes. And I think we have time for probably about one more question. And I want to end with, in the book, very much close to what you're talking to here,
Mm-hmm.
it begins, Daryl's journey begins with the courage to take that first step of, even if they don't get it, even if, like,
Uh,
there's no guarantee that this is going to make
yes.
me famous.
Yes.
Even so, it's worth it to be myself. And so I would love for you to just give parents, kids, that kind of word of courage
Mm-hmm.
to say, be your authentic self. It's worth it no matter what the outcome.
It's that scene in the book where Daryl, he says he's going to say his poem. The bullies and the kids tease him. He takes his name off the sign-up sheet. As
Mm-hmm.
soon as he does that, he feels something is not right with himself. But to please the others, he doesn't immediately right then and there write his name back on it. He has to go home. And then he goes home and he's surfing and he's picking and he says, Mom, what would you do if you wanted to do something that you really wanted to do, but you didn't really want to do it? You really wanted to do it, but the others didn't think it. And what does his mother said? Honey, the first thing you have to do is not worry about what other people say, and you have to believe in yourself and do what you feel you need to do. And he still didn't agree, so he goes to sleep. And he has all these dreams about being something else. And in the dream, it doesn't feel right. And then in the dream, he says, I just want to be the best version of me. And in the dream, that feels so good. So he wakes up the next morning and he runs back to school and he puts his name back on the thing. The day of the contest comes. He got the paper in his hand. They take the paper and rip it up. And he's gone. He's going, oh my God, I'm over. But then he realizes the thing that I'm the one that wrote the stuff on the paper. So it's not on the paper, it's inside me. The confidence comes to make the kids understand they'll be okay, to make the parents understand, encourage them from where they are at. They don't have to be like anybody else. You don't have to please anybody else. The magic is in the desire to do the thing that you want to do and be the person that you want to do. At the end of the book, one of the most important lessons is this, and it's very reciprocal of the question you just asked. At the end of the book, Charlie and Denise, the two kids who were teasing him, what do? They go, Daryl, that poem is so cool. We didn't know. We didn't know. We didn't know poetry could be that. They had a perception, but until Daryl showed them, these kids got to be. The kids need the confidence. Demonstrate. Don't be afraid to show the world who you are. So Charlie goes, "Wow, Daryl, can you teach me to do poems like you?" Daryl smiles and says, I will teach you. Here's the most important lesson. But Charlie, you got to do poetry the way Charlie wants to do it. So throughout that
Mm.
whole journey, it's be yourself.
Yeah. Yep.
Be yourself. And don't be afraid to be yourself, because at the end of the day, Sally, Johnny, Charlie, Daryl, Lance, Patricia, Caffrey, Deborah, and Nadine, people will understand how perfect you are.
I love it. Thank you so much for, it's just so much wisdom born of real experience, somebody who's put in the work and seen it from all different angles. I really appreciate that you have decided to share that with the world and share it with us today. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for having me. What's really cool is this is like a confidence situation for me. It's like, oh, Daryl, they want to talk to you. Daryl, you got to go speak at the education conference. Daryl, you got to go speak in front of the deans and the superintendents of school. And I'm like a little kid in fourth grade. What do I know? I don't want to get up on stage. I'm scared to death. I think
Yes.
one of the words that I used earlier was communication. What we're doing, having dialogue, and me having examples to use to help
Mhm.
the teachers and the educators and the caregivers get the message across. That's very empowering for all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of the things that Daryl and I discussed fall under the umbrella of social and emotional learning, a component of education that covers everything from cooperation to self regulation to numerous other things that come up in the classroom. Around 25 years ago, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, began to look at what had previously been kind of a hodgepodge of so-called soft skills to see if there was more that could be harnessed to benefit kids in classrooms. Now, decades later, those ideas exist in many forms in classrooms and homes, clinics, even, as we will see, the news. Castle came up with this framework, which you'll hear our panelists in the next section refer to often as they discuss the expanding reach of social and emotional learning, its value throughout the life of the child, from early development through high school to adulthood, and some of the political pushback it has received in recent years. The panelists are Rebecca Ozuna, an educator with Austin Independent School District in Texas, Rick Hess, a policy analyst from the American Enterprise Institute, and Jenny Radesky, a pediatrician and researcher at the University of Michigan. Thank you all for being here today. I think this is an important conversation that has a lot of different ways in. And once we get into it, a lot of different twisty, windy paths to take. And so I'm really excited to have different people who come at it from different angles. And with that, I want to give you a chance to tell our viewers what your angle is. Where do you come to this topic of social and emotional learning? And so if you would introduce yourself and give just a brief explanation of when you say social and emotional learning, what does that mean and how does it impact the work that you do?
I'm Rebecca Ozuna, and I'm a grant specialist in Austin ISD. And I work on a grant from the Department of Justice, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, at 3 campuses here. I'm a former pre-K special education teacher. I've been in education for 12 years now, in public education for 12 years. And when I think of social and emotional learning, I think of the skill sets of social skills and then emotional regulation and how important that is for our students in our classrooms and for educators to be aware of when creating lessons and activities for them.
Hi, I'm Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies at AEI in Washington, D.C. I was a high school social studies teacher in the last century. I occasionally teach college at various places. Mostly I think about policy in terms of K-12 and higher ed. I write a lot about school improvement and educational improvement. For me, social emotional learning is really how do we think about all of that, the soft tissue of education, which is about ensuring that all kids feel valued and welcome, making sure we're developing the mindsets and habits that equip children to be successful, students and citizens. But I'm also frustrated that we're often talking past each other in ways that seem problematic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Radesky. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician and associate professor at University of Michigan Medical School. So in my clinical work, I mostly follow neurodiverse kids with autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities. So I see social and emotional learning as like a crucial part of them accessing the curriculum at school. So many of my patients feel overwhelmed and big feelings when they get into a busy classroom, when they have new demands placed, like learning to read, when they're misinterpreting social cues. So I've been so impressed with the teachers I've worked with who have used things like the zones of regulation curriculum or social thinking or other ways where they break down for kids, how's your brain feeling, how's your body feeling, how do we solve this rather than react to it. And that really lets kids feel understood, and it lets them just settle down and then be able to learn. And so I love that it's now actually becoming a more mainstream idea of helping kids really, regulate their emotions in school, think about other kids' perspectives, build empathy, and be flexible thinkers.
I love that. And I think about working with neurodiverse kids. And then I also think about all of these kids coming back from the pandemic. And Rebecca, I'd love to hear you talk about having to retrain students to be in a school community, and what are they having to relearn with regards to social emotional learning?
When the pandemic started, the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people in education were excited to reimagine and rethink public education. We had teachers struggling with giving failing grades for things when they were saying, well, but my students don't have internet access right now, or my students don't have the things that they need, like books, and they're not getting lessons the way they typically would. And people started to think like, let's reimagine what public education is and really look at that foundation of what learning is and how learning occurs. So I think coming back from the pandemic, we tried really hard to just build those relationships with kids in our schools, right? And so like every classroom has a teacher providing instruction, but it also has a culture and a climate. And so we talked a lot about just the culture and like what we provide for our kids when they're at school, and how it had to be a little bit different than what we did before, right? There was a huge emphasis on youth mental health, teacher well-being, self-care. And so a lot of those things, like everything was just greatly intertwined. And I like to think that we learned a lot after the pandemic, and but we still returned to school buildings, and so there's little pieces here and there where I think that we could still work on some of the virtual aspects, and to really support all of our students. We have to take care of our teachers because they're the ones facing and working with the kids every day. They're building those environments where kids are learning. And so I think a lot of those were kind of lessons learned. It made us really rethink the way that, learning occurs. And I think with the research around social emotional learning, it's helped a lot of educators change a bit of practice and start looking at those cultural pieces and other aspects around how our students learn best, how we can provide that, and how we can go off of student interest when they're in our classrooms.
So Jenny, my world, Rick's world, Rebecca's world is largely focused on schools, but how does social emotional learning, what does that mean in your office? When it shows up, what are the words that show up, and how do you translate that?
It comes up in a couple different ways. One is when I'm guiding families on like how to choose a daycare or preschool or other educational experience. And if they are lucky and have a few options or a couple places around their neighborhood, I ask them to go talk to the teachers and say, what's your instructional approach? And I talk about social emotional learning as a really essential part of that, in addition to other aspects of curriculum, because it means that the teachers are going to have either training or at least a lens on your child that's trying to understand all the emotions that are bundled up with tackling everyday challenges, such as transitions, sitting in circle time, learning how to share. All of these are like crucial parts of early education and elementary school. And they just evolve as you get a little bit older into problem solving and empathy. And so that's one way, is that I actually proactively tell families to kind of look for that as a component of an early education experience. It also comes up for slightly older kids when a child has lagging skills in social skills or emotional regulation, often with a diagnosis of ADHD or anxiety or autism or learning differences. And then we will look for those social and emotional supports to be in that child's learning plan, whether it's a 504 plan or an IEP. These are ways that explicit teaching of understanding other people's perspectives, identifying and regulating your emotions, learning to tackle new challenges that may not be your favorite thing to do. We call them non-preferred tasks. Handling unstructured time when there's no clear set of rules and someone kind of telling you what to do step by step. Those are essential skills that we want extra time and repetition taught to kids where it doesn't come naturally to them. So that's another main bucket. And the third main bucket is just the way you talk about social and emotional life with your kids at home. Is that kids naturally pick up from us the way we talk about our emotions, the way we problem solve around them, the way we either overreact to them or shove them down deeper and cope with them in less healthy ways. So the more you can have a language of, this is how I feel and it's okay. And we did a lot more of this during the pandemic, which I think was really healthy for America, to say it's okay to feel terrible. And then to identify and talk about it and have relationships where you trust, and you don't just, try to scream about it online on social media, that you actually have a few relationships that you can go to and learn how to handle it. Or you learn a new skill like taking walks with your dog, or, going swimming, or learning yoga, or something else, listening to music that makes you able to regulate, calm down, and be your best self. So that's the third bucket of where I'm kind of coaching families, where, many times when families come in for a developmental and behavioral evaluation, they're in the red and orange zone themselves. They are stressed. They're worried they're going to be judged. They have already been judged by a lot of people in stores or teachers or, other people who interact with their kids. And so part of our goal is to say, okay, how do you as a parent get back into that green zone of, I'm calm, I can handle this. We're just, I'm not going to react to this. I'm really going to, slow down and use my skills and my tools. And then my kid will learn naturally by watching me and actually collaborating with me on, oh, this bad thing just happened. How are we going to handle it? And having more of that vocabulary at home rather than, you're driving me crazy, go to your room. I'm going to go get on my phone and we're not going to talk about it at all. So, of course, none of us is perfect, but as long as we do this like a good enough amount of time, it really does help set social and emotional skills for kids that will transfer into what they're doing in school as well.
Yeah. And I'm curious, as you're talking, as a lot of it sounds like I've heard social emotional learning described as both how you learn and something that is a what that you learn. So there's actual literal skills that need to be explicitly conveyed. But then there's also, like you said, the atmosphere of the classroom and things we know about how to create an environment where a kid can learn. Rick, where do you think the disconnect is starting to happen? When you say that we're talking past each other, do you think it's happening in that how we're building classroom climate, or do you think that there's things in the actual topics and words and language that we're using that are starting to get misunderstood?
Both, and I wouldn't even say starting to. Castle has obviously been at this work for 20 odd years. One of the things that I appreciated about the Castle wheel in the old days was how they try to make a real point of the primacy of academic learning, that this is about how to set children up to be academically successful. And one change that's happened is there are an increasing number of folks who, when they think about SEL, they have quite consciously suggested that the center should not be academic achievement, that academic achievement should simply be relegated to one goal among many. So that's not a misunderstanding. That is a fundamental disagreement about what we want to happen for children at schools. A second is that particularly over the last several years has, as efforts around what advocates think of as anti-racism, what folks like me see as problematically ideological instruction, have become more central in schools. You've seen, for instance, Castle rewriting some of the language around ways where it starts to talk about microaggression and about whiteness in ways that I think are both problematic on their face and far removed from my traditional understanding of how we use SEL to equip all children for success. So that's a place where it's not a disconnect about academics. It's an ideological debate. And then what also happens, and this is more of just talking past each other. In education, whenever grant writers, not grant writers, whenever foundations start to write grants to fund various things, and state and federal officials start to put money out there, and whether this was the push for standards in the late aughts or teacher evaluation a decade ago or what have you, everybody starts to rewrite their mission statements and their approach to the work in a way to make sure they're eligible for the money. And so what happens is it becomes a money chase in which lots of people try to redefine whatever they're doing in a way that lets them bring in the bucks. And that means that these ideas wind up getting diluted to the point where people are using the same language just to mean fundamentally different things.
Jenny, in your work with parents, do you see much of a debate about this? Do you see this parents really worried about, oh, is SEL good or bad?
I am glad you asked that question, because the political debate over SEL has always totally confused me, because I see it as most of the parents of kids that I work with see it as this essential part of a child's learning. And the fact that it was kind of being labeled as some sort of negative curriculum component felt like it wasn't reflecting the daily experiences of kids in school or the parents that are getting, say, reports home about how behavior went that day. So here's an example: is a social emotional learning approach to a child who is either neurodiverse or neurotypical means a teacher is wondering, what's this kid going through? Why did they just act like that? They're not punishing or disciplining. They're more kind of helping the child learn how to identify an emotion, how to mention it and talk about it, how to manage it in the moment. And then the feedback a parent gets after what used to be called like, oh, he had a tough day, which every parent, that just like makes your stomach like sink, is, well, we think that his behavior, was more upset because of X reason. We handled it with this. He responded well to Y. And this is going to be a new part of our, way of helping him, say, handle a transition. That's really good information to a parent who might say, oh, I'll use that at home, actually, because we have the same problem with transitions. And it also is extremely humanizing to have a teacher see your child as a little human who's just trying their best and sometimes, either can't maintain their attention or lose control of their emotions. And then as a parent, you don't feel as alienated by a teacher who you might feel is judging you, even though the teacher is just kind of, giving behavioral reports. It's the way we think and talk about behavior and emotions that really helps it be humanizing versus alienating. And so just to answer your question, parents find it such a relief when a teacher uses an SEL type of approach and uses that within the whole classroom so that kids too don't overreact to each other's behavior, but instead kind of pause and wonder how they can help. And so I think I want parents to know, don't react just to the kind of label and kind of buzz and noise around this. Really think about, is my child being understood? Are they working through not just the facts and figures and numbers and letters part of learning, but the emotional part of learning, which research shows is such a huge component of kids' success. If you can focus, stay calm, and manage challenges, that is such a huge predictor of a child graduating from high school and college compared to whether they know, their ABCs or, how to do math.
A large portion of our grants work in our schools has been to incorporate not only social and emotional learning, but cultural proficiency and inclusiveness. We look at restorative justice, not as it's done in the criminal justice system, but really the indigenous roots of what it means to be culturally responsive in restorative practices. I think that, again, I go back to my statement about teachers creating the environments that our kids are learning in. And the true need for learning to occur is that our students trust the person that's providing the learning and that we're using their experiences. So how can we create true learning experiences by saying, hey, student, the experiences that you've had in our school, in our community, are no longer valid because something that came out of Texas legislation says that I can't talk about it, right? And so there's a disconnect. Another piece of that is Castle's 5, SEL competencies. We look at those for our students all the time, and rarely do we say like, hey, and I'm still working on those for myself, like as an adult. And so we have to think about how our impact in our classroom, our culture, our experiences translate to what happens in our classrooms. Like there's never going to be a time where I say, like, I've reached the pinnacle of responsible decision making, don't have to do it again because the last couple of times I did it, it was perfect, so I can check that box. Instead, I say, I'm going to apply this to different contexts and different seasons of life, right? And that's what we want for our kids to do too. And so while it's become tricky because of things like the HB 3979 in Texas or the anti-CRT laws, really when you read those things, it just says, that no one can, teach that somebody is above another person, no one party or person, is above. There's really not anything about anti-CRT, but it's been kind of twisted in the media into this, they're, trying to, they don't want us preserving whiteness and all these different things that we hear. When really we're talking about using our students' background experiences, showing them, their genius and their culture in the class.
Some of the stuff that we talk about with SEL is acceptance of others, and exactly what you said. And so on some level, when you're talking to parents, I'm wondering how much that means to them that their child's classmates might have had some training and some explicit coaching in not alienating their child, the child who is different from them.
Yes, and I practice with lots of neurodiverse kids, but also kids growing up in the town of Ypsilanti that has a higher proportion of Black and Latino families, but also poverty. So parents describe lots of experiences of feeling like their child's not understood or their child's being reacted to more intensely, and feeling they really worry about misinterpretations of their child's behavior by school authorities or other personnel or peers when it comes to kind of getting in arguments and conflict resolution. And the number one thing I hear from parents of kids with autism or learning differences or ADHD is the peer acceptance and the culture of the classroom of understanding everybody brings strengths and challenges to this room. Everybody has something to contribute. Everybody lives and sees the world in a slightly different way. That is also a huge relief to parents who know, okay, people aren't just going to use their fast brain reactions to my kid when they're looking different. They're going to use their slow brain and wonder and listen and try to understand what that child's going through. So a really concrete example of this is children with autism sometimes have self-stimulatory behavior, stimming, and it feels good to them, or it's a sign that they're overwhelmed or anxious or excited. So it might be humming, it could be wiggling their fingers or flapping their hands or stiffening their arms. It looks really different, and parents are worried about their kids being judged by others. But if you create a classroom, rich in social emotional skills that tries to understand what other people different from you are going through, whether it's ability, race, culture, communication, the way they walk, the way they talk, what they eat, all of those are parts of social emotional skills about pausing, wondering, trying to see someone from someone else's perspective, see what life is like in their shoes. And when that happens, say in that case with a child with autism, kids get it. They can understand, oh, this boy in my class or my friend, he's a little overwhelmed. Let me either, number one, not feed into this by drawing attention to it or mocking him, but maybe even let me go help him take a break. That peer-to-peer intervention for kids with autism specifically is so helpful and really helps kids feel both included in the classroom experience, but also actually helps them improve and build more of the social skills that don't come as easy to them. And when it comes to race or culture, when you're discussing stressful things in the classroom, you may have to understand that for people from different backgrounds, those sources of stress may be very different based on, whether you're worried about deportation or whether you're worried about your parents' stress about being pulled over by a policeman the day before. Those are things that unfortunately differ between us based on our culture or the color of our skin. And so when you can open kids' minds and say, life is experienced differently for different kids, and for arbitrary reasons or for historical reasons or for different ability reasons, kids, we need to respect their intelligence, that they can wrap their head around that, and they can be the kind of good empathic people that we hope they will be, that they'll be the one to go like reach their arm out and help, rather than mocking or judging or getting in a fight with someone.
I wanted to kind of bring up, Ginny, I know this is a big area of research for you, but I'd love to hear from everybody on it. Increasingly, media, social media, mediated experiences, even something like this, like adults, as we've transferred online in the pandemic, are dealing with learning how to do Zoom etiquette. Like, when is it okay to just talk, or do I need to turn off my camera? But then also social media and these basically adding in yet another sphere, Ginny, like you talked about, of kind of chaos, of relational chaos that really does have an impact on the ability to learn, but also just the ability to flourish, to take that learning and put it into practice somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear very specifically what you guys are thinking about when kids were almost exclusively on social media for their social interactions during the pandemic. They were already on it a lot, and increasingly social media is following us into life in general. It's being part of college applications. It's, employers are looking at it. So how is there developing some skills around that particular environment?
I can start with that, since this is my area of research. And I want to take it kind of by developmental stage, because when you are a young child, you're not interacting through social media. Usually you may be consuming on a social platform like TikTok or YouTube, which a lot of my research shows isn't the highest quality educational material. It often can kind of feed what's the most trending and outrageous. But the most important things are that the media that we're serving kids at those young ages is worth their time and attention. Something like, PBS and Noggin and the others that have really taken care to really make sure that kids are going to learn and benefit from the funny characters they see or the stories that they hear. But at the same time, kids are watching their parents use media too. So one of our emotion socialization practices at home is, when I get stressed, do I pick up my phone and go sit on the couch and ignore everyone, right? So thinking about the parents' own tech use, the way, of course, we all need a break to go escape sometimes, but recognizing when it's becoming your crutch in the way that you're kind of escaping from moments when you actually could be using some emotional labels or some problem-solving language, or helping your child get through a tough moment. That's one thing my research is suggesting. We do need to kind of dig into those tough moments with our kids and not just withdraw into technology. I think as kids get older, they use social media in both positive and negative ways during the pandemic, and their peer relationships are so important to them. I think as parents, we should just talk to our kids about how that felt and help them learn from it naturally. And as a parent, I'd say I really want parents to recognize that social media bubbles have become places that, in my research, parents describe as, not especially helpful. They love their close ties with their family members, their good friends, being able to be part of like a school community, those things that, are close to you. But when it comes to the bigger kind of noise about politics, about people posting toxic comments, about, what Rick was saying before about people just talking past each other because they're just accelerating whatever extreme thing they heard on social media, that's where it's not helpful. And I think it becomes more divisive. So I would really recommend, and the families I've talked to for research say, really try to curate your own social media, make it something that you feel like you put it down and you're like, oh, that felt good. I actually benefited from connecting from some people. I'm not just putting it down disgusted at whatever anger or outrage is going on.
What does this weigh in? Does this affect a policy landscape? Is there social and emotional policy to be built around the social media world?
Sure. When the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development came out with its big report about 5 years ago, I'd helped them with it a little bit. And, Tim Shriver and I wrote a couple of pieces about it. I love the way they talked about it. I mean, I think the way Rebecca's talking about it, the way Jenny's talking about it, I'm on board. One of the big problems that I banged the drum about for 15 years was how we seem to dehumanize schools. We seem to have trouble walking and chewing gum in education sometimes. And we got the message that we were paying insufficient attention to academic learning. But somehow the way we took that in the No Child Left Behind era was we managed to squeeze out a lot of things that are crucial. And one way I like to think about social emotional learning is the stuff Jenny and Rebecca are talking about, I think, so persuasively, is making sure we pay attention to that children are not little learning machines, they're little people. And that has got to be part of what teachers do. That's got to be part of what schools are about. That's certainly how parents and families relate to their children. So that's all. That's I'm on board. Where I get concerned, and so two kind of policy-ish implications here. One, the stuff Jenny was talking about, I love. That all makes a ton of sense to me. I do worry, though, that we have this problem that we take the thoughtful, useful things Jenny is saying, and then we exaggerate it in a non-productive way. So saying that it's got to be about learning the language to talk to kids and about families coaching their kids on devices does not mean we should have no boundaries. We also need to have parents in the habit of saying this much screen time and no more. Get off your butt, go outside and talk to your friends outside. Talk to your friends while you're walking somewhere or doing something. You're not allowed to just sit on your phone for the next 6 hours texting back and forth. That's not okay. Doug Lamont, author of Teach Like a Champion, just wrote, I thought, a terrific essay for Education Next, arguing that we need to get devices out of schools for at least a big chunk of the day so that kids have that opportunity to interact with them. So I think one of the problems we can get into with the SEL stuff is that we take virtues like empathy and support and understanding, and we somehow imagine that we can do those instead of the responsibilities of creating structured, thoughtful, disciplined learning environments for kids. When we have these conversations about disciplinary methods, about restorative justice, about any number of strategies, I understand the case for the strategy. I think they can be useful when done carefully and well in a thoughtful way. But I think sometimes people go, oh, we've got a solution. And we risk undermining things that are really important to make sure that schools are safe, productive places for kids and adults. The second piece, when it comes to policy and SEL, is look, there's a lot of people are giving educators a lot of competing direction. Here's what we think it means. Is it a set of tools, or is it part of the functional curriculum? How much should you approach it? What should you talk about? And one of the places I think there's very much an appropriate role for policy is to say, here's the expectation. Here's how we think at the third grade level. Here's what we have in mind. Here's the kind of conversations. This creates, whether this policy emanates at the school board level, whether it's taken up the state legislature, these are things we can argue about in good faith. But I think it's absolutely fair that parents say, yeah, we want what Jenny's talking about, but we don't think that means open season, so that anybody can interpret SEL to mean whatever they feel like and can wind up talking in second grade classrooms about things that parents would not find supportive and helpful, but might find destructive or inappropriate. And I think sometimes we wind up lining up that we're either for teachers' authority to do these things, or for parents And I think this stuff's actually a handshake between parents and educators, and policy is an important part of shaping that handshake.
Much, Jenny and Rick, I want to really respect your time. I know what a hard out means. So
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you guys so much. And thank you for being so thoughtful and nuanced about everything. It was really great.
Great to be with you guys.